Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Road to Financial Freedom, a podcast that allows experts to share their stories and secrets to unlocking their financial independence. This podcast is brought to you by CamaPlan, a self-directed IRA administrator in Ambler, PA, that's focused on educating investors with different ways to grow their retirement savings faster through alternative investments. And today we are coming at you again remotely from all of our different homes. I'm Jess Jones. I am a team member at CamaPlan and host of this podcast. I am thrilled to introduce you to today's guest. He is an accomplished entrepreneur, author, and musician whose guide to transforming finances, the Fiscal Therapy Solution 1.0, a 6-step process to financial health for you and your business, has helped others set goals and turn their dreams into realities. Please welcome Marc Bernstein to our podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, Marc.
You're welcome, Jessica. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks. So we're just going to dive right in. Tell us some more about your background, like where you grew up and where you went to school, what you studied, things like that.
Sure. I grew up in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania, just a couple miles down the road from CamaPlan. And I went to Plymouth Whitemarsh High School, started college at Temple University in Philadelphia, finished and graduated from the University of Delaware for all the fighting blue hens out there. And then for you Buckeye fans, went to law school at Ohio State, finishing at NYU. So I moved around a lot depending on my educational needs, I guess.
Yeah. So at each of those schools, you said you attended Ohio for law, but what are some of the things you studied at Temple, Delaware, things like that? You mentioned that you kind of changed things up as you went along too.
Yeah, so I was a music major, and knowing that I probably wasn't going to be a professional musician, although I had visions in my head of being a rock and roll star at the time. But I didn't know what I was going to do till my sophomore year, and I was in a romantic literature course. And there was something about the romantic poets that inspired me to think about how I could tie music and business together. And it came to my head that there must be lawyers who represent musicians. And I didn't have any idea at that time. This is a while ago. I didn't know what an entertainment lawyer was, but I discovered that. Decided that's what I wanted to be, and went to Ohio State mainly because my undergraduate fraternity provided me with a position there. I was paying my way through law school, and I got free room and board. I got a scholarship, and I was able to become a resident there in a year. So it was an efficient way to do it. But by the third year of law school, I realized it would be helpful to have some special education. So I went to NYU to basically take entertainment and copyright law courses, and blew all the money I saved all the other years because it was an expensive place to go to school. But it was well worth it in terms of the education I got. And I was in New York City, and I was making connections in the entertainment business. And, it gave me a good start to where I thought I wanted to go.
That's really cool. I'm really interested in the fact that you were inspired by romantic poetry because I was also an English major. So I'm just wondering, is there any particular poem too? This is completely tangential, but is there a particular poem that you still think of or go back to that you're like, wow, thank goodness I read that?
Nope. But I remember it was a course on like Byron and Keats and those guys. And it was something, I remember the professor's name, and I don't remember many of my professors' names. His name was Charles Robinson. And he didn't say it, but it was something that he said that led me to that thought, and I can't remember what that was. I remember one other professor I had that was a non-music professor. I remember many of my music professors, but had a political science professor named Jim Oliver. And he said the only thing I remember about political science that he taught was that the masses are asses. I remember that one.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say he was right. It's funny. I was just thinking about this earlier today and how I had this professor, David Rosenwasser, who, if it wasn't for him, I don't think I would have even taken up the English major. I went to school thinking I was going to go in for musical theater. And same as you, I was like, I had those fantasies of being a Broadway star. And then after I took this class, it was like breaking down comedy and why things are funny, and like all the way back from Greek and Roman literature to like a film script for a Martin McDonough. I was just blanking on the writer's name, but Martin McDonough script, and what makes these things funny, like socially constructed ideas that make things funny. And it just reshaped the entire way I thought about it. And I was like, oh, I'd be remiss not to be an English major. So that's really interesting. It's interesting how life can take you in a strange direction just from reading a one poem.
Well, ultimately, when I look back, all my education was connected together. I went from music to law. And one of the things I realized was when I was bored in class sometimes, I would look around and see how many left-handed people there were in the classes because I'm left-handed. And the general population, about 15% are left-handed. In both my music classes and my law classes, it was about 33%. It was about a third. So I started looking into why that was. And, left-handed people are supposed to have sometimes a little higher level of intelligence. Many of our past presidents over the last 25 years have been left-handed, by the way. If I'm not mistaken, I think Bush, Clinton, and Obama were all left-handed. But, there's a different way of thinking for sure. And I used a lot of the same thinking in music, law, and eventually in financial planning, the creativity aspect of it. Well, the logical aspect, there's a math aspect to it in music that I think also certainly applies in financial planning. And the logic aspect applies to all three. And I think I have, as a background as an attorney, I have a very rational, logical side, but also have a very creative side, because I like to say that financial planning is more of an art than it is a science. There is no real perfection. It's always a progress more so than perfection. And that's what I shoot for in my practice. In a way, I think it all connected together in the end.
That's really interesting to know. And so when I was reading up and doing some research, Mark, about your past history, I know that your family has a history as entrepreneurs and investors. I was just interested particularly in your father's journey as a businessman and a role model for you. Do you want to talk some more about that?
Sure. Well, my father was I guess he was like a born entrepreneur. He came out of the Army. I think he went to 2 years of community college on the West Coast. And then basically he went into the candy business. He was in the chocolate and candy business out of Detroit. And he moved to Philadelphia for a job, met my mother, got married, and then was going to start his own chocolate company. It was going to be called Carousel Chocolates. And somewhere along the line, he took a left turn, was presented a way to get into the greeting card business, and he saw a better opportunity there. So he instead created Carousel greeting cards, which he started, I think I was about 2 or 3 years old. So this is, it's a long time ago. So he started that business and he built it up to the point when he's in his mid 50s that, he could finally stop working 7 days a week, take it easy a little bit. And then something happened that's in the book when I was a senior in high school. And that was there was a fire in his building. It didn't start in his business, but it connected business in the building. And started by an arsonist, as it turns out, in Norristown, Pennsylvania is where it was.
Oh my gosh.
And it went through the whole building. And in his case, what wasn't destroyed by fire was destroyed by smoke and water. So what that meant was he basically lost his whole business. I remember standing there watching the smoke and really literally watching his business life go up in smoke. And he realized that he didn't have enough fire insurance, property casualty business insurance. And he had a big question about what he was going to do. And there was a period for the next couple of months where he thought maybe he was going to throw in the towel, get a job, and just end it because he was in too much of a hole that he thought he could get out. And he was ready. I remember I was a senior in high school and he was ready to move to Kansas City, move the family to Kansas City. So that's where a lot of greeting card manufacturers were. I still are, maybe, I'm not sure. And I was like, well, I'm not going. I have, I had a girlfriend, I had a band, I had a life as far as I knew. So I said, I'm not going, which was kind of selfish of me in hindsight. But, in the end, he decided not to do it. I don't know if that influenced him or what happened, but he decided not to do it. And he decided that what he had to do is regroup, figure out how to grow his business. And he had to triple the size of his business in his mid-50s and go back to working real hard again to do that in order to ultimately be successful, which he ended up doing. So obviously, when you look at my financial pyramid, I won't get into that now, but it starts at the bottom level of hierarchy of financial needs. It starts with protection. And I think that was a lesson that left like an emotional imprint on me, that you better have enough insurance to cover the things that can hurt you a lot more than a bad month or a bad few months in business or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So there was that. And then the positive side of all that, that was a positive lesson I learned. But the other positive lesson was, put in a lot of hard work early as an entrepreneur. And I mean, it wasn't like completely starting over for him. He had to grow it. But if he hadn't done the base he had done for all those years before, it would have been a whole different story. So I think, and I have two brothers, and I think we've all, in our different areas, we have workaholic tendencies that I think came from that. I'm learning to manage those to a certain extent. I think it all arose out of that imprint we had, but to a certain extent, you have to put in a lot of time early on as an entrepreneur. And I think that certainly was in my blood or in my DNA.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So the next question I have involves your advisory. How did you get involved in that? And how did you get involved in advisory and ventures, those things that you're involved in?
So, well, in terms of the advisor business, after a few years of knocking around in the entertainment business, which, as you know, can be a little hard, and
Yep.
and I gave myself a window of time. I think it was 3 or 4 years that I was going to do it, and I was, there were some modest signs of success on the horizon, but I knew it would take a long, long time and a lot of suffering, more or less, to get there. And I just decided that I wanted to have a solid way to make a living, and I wanted more immediate gratification. I had some sales experience through college, and I found this burgeoning field of financial planning. Actually, one of my brothers told me about it, and I went to an interview with a company that wanted to hire attorneys. I thought, oh, this is perfect. This would suit me perfectly. Only problem is they wouldn't hire me because they wanted an attorney like me today, at my age today, with all my connections. They didn't want a 28, 29-year-old kid that,
Yeah.
they gave me a test that was really a marketing test, and they didn't feel that I had the right clients to bring them, which I probably didn't. Although I was a pretty good marketer and pretty resourceful, and I probably could have done it. So I actually started in the life insurance business where they promised me certain things that really didn't materialize for a couple of years. And I was still on the path to financial planning. So I started a business that was called Maxwell Financial at the time with a partner that was going to do comprehensive financial planning with a broker dealer that supported that. Made a lot of mistakes with that. I made a partner mistake. I made a bad judgment on a partner. They didn't have the right financial planning platform really to make it work. So it was it's kind of a crooked road I took for a number of years. Then I wound up with a large regional firm where I learned the art of planning, which was good, but they didn't charge fees. They weren't doing the fee-based financial planning model that I wanted to do. But after knocking around for maybe 5 to 10 years, they started building that platform, and I helped build the platform and, became one of the biggest advocates there of true financial planning. So it was, it's kind of a long, winding road to get there. And, but I eventually found a model that I really enjoyed that I thought was really the right thing for clients. That's how I got into that. In terms of ventures, other ventures and businesses and investments, that's happened just naturally over the years from association with people I've met along the way in business. But I don't think that's my big story, so I won't spend a lot of time on that right now.
Yeah, no worries. So what does your advisory do then from all those things that you learned? Can you explain some more about what your advisory does?
Sure. So, well, first of all, I wrote a book. You mentioned that. It's called the Fiscal Therapy Solution 1.0, and it pretty much describes what we do. It's called 6 Steps to Personal and Business Financial Health. And what I do is the title, it kind of mimics, it's a pun, fiscal therapy. So it kind of mimics what a doctor or a physical therapist or a therapist might do. And if I read you the chapter titles, it's What Brought You Here, Getting to Know You, Let's Have a Look. What we need to do is, these are all things a doctor might say, this won't hurt a bit, and see you in 3 to 6 months. So it's a process that really begins with discovery. There are other people that do that in our industry, but very few, I think, do it to the extent that we do it. We are very in depth, really want to get to know our client. And then we start to develop a plan. We ask them really broad questions that get narrower and narrower and narrower in terms of what they really would like to have happen in their business lives or personal lives or financial lives. From there, we build a plan, and from the plan comes the implementation, and the implementation is where you may find the products. And products could be insurance products, could be investment products, could be assortment of different financial products. But I think it's different because I think most of the industry leads with the products they want to sell. And I think that's a big difference. So I mentioned before about my financial planning pyramid. On the cover, there's a picture of a blank pyramid that looks like it's made of money. And it's representative because when I started in the business, they showed me a financial planning pyramid that started with cash at the bottom and CDs and money markets and then CDs. And then it would go up in terms of levels of risk. So it might go to bonds and then to mutual funds and to stocks, then to more aggressive types of alternative investments and things like that. And I always remember thinking, the one thing I learned in law school was how to ask good questions. And that's one thing they teach you very well. And I didn't really understand how I knew, I won't mention the company where I started, but how did I know that they were going to need those products that they sold? And especially there was a bit of a mismatch because they were selling a lot of permanent insurance products, and I had a young market that didn't necessarily need them at that time. Might have been helpful to them, but it wasn't what they really needed or wanted. So I started thinking about that, and over a long period of time, I realized that there ought to be a pyramid, but it ought to look a little different. It ought to look based on the categories of goals. So mine says protection, savings and debt, growth, income, and legacy, which I think pretty much covers the gamut of the range of financial goals that people might have. And all of our questions are centered around those things and general lifestyle type questions and things like that. And I think as a result, we have a very high retention rate of clients. So we generally don't lose clients. And I've won awards for that throughout the years of my career and things like that. And I think a lot of it is because we discover, then we educate, then people make their own decisions as to what they think is going to help rather than be sold things for the most part. And I think that's a huge difference between what we and a lot of the industry do.
Yeah, I love the idea of driving home the fact that your clients are making their decisions and it's not being sold anything, they're being sold their choice, I think that that's really interesting.
Right. We're trying to figure out how to get them to wherever they want to go.
Yeah, I love that. That is exactly what we, want to help our listeners learn is how they can unlock that financial freedom for themselves. And I think that's great. I'm so interested in learning more about your fiscal therapy solution and hearing more about these steps. So the next question I do have actually does involve what the Fiscal Therapy Solution 1.0 has been designed to help. Who did you write it for? Was there any person in particular, or was it, I know you've touched on this so far, but was there any particular inspiration that came about to write this book?
Just something I always had in me. I'm creative and I think wanted to express myself, but I also thought I had a little different outlook than other people. So it's written for potential clients. Most of our clients are entrepreneurs or, owners of professional firms. We do have people pre-retirement and things like that too, but primarily they're business owners for the most part. So that's the market. The other part of the market is our other advisors who have also, because I think it's a message to the industry as well.
Awesome. All right. So who inspired you to become an entrepreneur? I know you talked a lot about your father, but was there anything else that inspired you early on?
Well, yeah, it was my father, and he, his business, he had a business that he had to, payroll and all that, and he had to run the business, but he also had, his main thing he did was selling. He sold greeting cards. He was a wholesaler. And I remember as a young kid, and I was, rebellious and was going to be a musician. I was never going to be in sales. I'm never going to do that.
Right.
And
Exactly.
I used to make the rounds with him. My dad was, he was known for, he had a cigar in his mouth all the time. It was sort of like, you could say the stereotypical salesman of the time. He read Dale Carnegie and all the self-help books and all that stuff. And I was like, I'm never going to do that. So then I was in college. And there was a guy that I knew of when I was in high school that also went to the University of Delaware. And there was a woman that was a confidant to both of us because she knew my girlfriend at the time and he dated one of her daughters at some point. So she told me, when you go there, you ought to meet this guy. And I never really liked him because he used to stand on the sidelines when I was in the marching band in high school. And he was always, his girlfriend, I didn't know it was his girlfriend at the time, was marching next to me. And I kind of liked her, and he definitely didn't like me. So it didn't start out, it didn't start out on a good basis. So anyway, I see these posters all over the school, and it was like, earn $3,000 a summer, which was like a lot of money back then to earn in the summer.
Uh-huh.
And so I went to it. I said, let me check it out. And I had heard this guy had made a lot of money selling cookware. I go in and there he is. And I'm like, oh no, it's him again. And he was real cocky and cocksure about it. But I'd heard he'd done real well. And my motivation was, well, if he can do it, I can do it.
Yeah, that's when I was in musical theater and in auditions and things like that, that was always my mindset too. Like, oh, if she can sing, I can do that too.
Well, that would help you. That would help you in the music field for sure too. But
Yeah.
so anyway, we were always a little competitive, and I saw him, and I said, well, I could do that. So I went up afterwards and reminded who I was, that we had this common family friend. Another unusual thing back then is when I started working together, I said I'd like to take a break because I'd recently become a meditator. So at a young age, I've been doing a form of meditation for over 40 years. He said, what kind of meditation? And I told him, and he said, I do the same thing. So we'd pull over the car and we'd both meditate for a while. And we became fast friends. He eventually brought me into his fraternity. So we're now fraternity brothers. He's my big brother in the fraternity. So we went from like enemies to very close friends.
Wow.
He had been a top guy in the company the summer before. So that made him a manager in Philadelphia. So then I became a top salesman in the firm, and they offered me a management slot. So he and I went to North Jersey together, and basically we ran an office. The year after that, he ended up working full-time for the company. He graduated, and I went to Columbus, Ohio, which was because I had decided to go to Ohio State University, so it all worked out together. Graduation day, I got in the car, and I didn't even make my graduation. I drove straight to Columbus. And in one summer, you had to set up an office, recruit all your salespeople from scratch. The only thing they assigned me was a guy from Worcester, Massachusetts, who was my sales manager. I was the district manager. And you had to set this whole thing up, teach people to sell a lot of pots and pans, quality cookware, we prefer to call it, during the course of the summer, and then close down the office and go back to school. The guy that founded that company, I'm friendly with still. We are actually on a national board together. He's become a big philanthropist. And it was really one of the most valuable experiences I ever had. So that converted me from saying I'd never be in sales, not only to, that I would be in sales, but also I'd be entrepreneurial, because basically that's what you had to be. It was like a startup business. They gave you guidelines and they paid for it, but you basically were taking on all the people risk. And you had a short time to really start and run a business. It was a pretty cool experiment.
Do you have any more stories about any early successes or failures that you had that informed how you built your advisory today?
Well, look, you have to sell. So the selling experience gave me a lot of confidence. I became like a top rookie at the company where I started, and that, inspired my confidence more. And then I got a partner and started a company, as I told you. And then that's where I had a lot of failures. So I picked a bad partner. I recruited a lot of the wrong people into the business. I was what's called a district agency of a general agency. And the general agent was a great person, but it had never been on that end of the business. And they misexplained our contracts to us. So suddenly I had all these people that weren't qualifying contracts that filed for unemployment, and I had to go defend unemployment claims. I mean, it went to the school of hard knocks in the business. So for a young guy in my 20s, I was learning a lot of things that way. You learn from your mistakes. But yeah, I had a lot of failures early on. So really important. Those are some examples.
Yeah, I think that having failure early on is such a common thread for a lot of the people that are successful later on. So you gotta have the failure to have success. It's the same with music and with business. I think that that's helpful, especially for listeners to hear, like young listeners, like people around my age are probably grateful to hear, oh, you know what, if this guy who wrote this successful book had failures and had, not bad judging character, but picked the wrong people, and I think
not
that
bad
that'll help
people, just the
people.
wrong people, not bad people, but the wrong people for the jobs. So,
Right,
and
exactly.
look, and I'm in a business, there's a lot of recognition in our business. I've won a lot of awards and all that stuff. But the emotional imprint, I have much more from the failures. And, they say your greatest lessons are not from your successes, but from your failures. So, I think they're real important. I think anybody's got to swing the bat and strike out a lot of times before they make it. So, and you just keep trying. You don't quit.
Yeah, that's important too. See, I know there have been plenty of times where I wanted to be like, No, I've had enough of this. I'm done, especially when I was auditioning and things like that. And if I didn't continue and if I didn't learn from the failure, I don't think I would be sitting here talking to you today. You know what I mean? I don't
Yep, I had a lot of that in the music business too, without question. So it's another great place to build character for sure.
Right, exactly. So, speaking of that, what characteristics do you think makes somebody successful financially?
First of all, in business, I think, learning from your mistakes, I think that's true in terms of being financially successful too. But, there are a lot of simple rules, some of which I refer to in the book. Ben Franklin was famous for saying, pay yourself first. And my father always preached that to me too. And I didn't start as early as in hindsight I would have liked. But when I got into this business, I did always put away a little bit of money off the top, and it became greater amounts over time. And there's nothing to replace that. There was a financier from somewhere in the first part of the 20th century, Bernard Baruch, and he said, it's not as important where you save your money as to how much you save. I think that's really important, that people are always thinking, what's the best financial tool and all that? I think it's most important to have a systematic way of saving money off of the top. And, to a certain extent, you can spend what's less and then jump on opportunities. One of the things, and I've not been a huge risk taker in that regard because I felt like being in business was always a risk. So I never really did a lot of really adventurous investments. But the older I get, the more adventurous I'm getting, which is not what you're really supposed to do. But with part of the money, I'm finding more and more to be open to the universe. If an opportunity comes along, think it through, analyze it, make sure it makes sense. But you only get so many opportunities. Take advantage of them when you can. So I think that's an important aspect.
Exactly. And would you say that now that you're older, you've taken more risks? And would you say that that also coincides with being more financially free now than you were when you were starting out and working when you were
Well,
younger?
sure. Putting in the work early on. Look, I'm a
Right.
work in progress too. I could be totally financially free today if I wanted to accept a certain vision of my life for the rest of my life. I'm too vital for that. So I don't want to stop working, number one. Number two, I'd like to have more of a cushion and more money to give away, not just enough money to live on, but I want to have money to give away, to be philanthropic, to have a legacy. I've got a lot more in me. So, and that's personal to everybody, but that's why we talk about all those 5 categories of the pyramid, because I did an earlier podcast today. It's
Mhm.
called Changing the Rules, with a guy his name's Ray Lowe, and he brands himself as the luckiest guy in the world. And we knew each other early on in business. When I took over that district agency years ago, he also had one. We were friends then, lost touch for about 25 or 30 years. And on a plane, I recognized his voice sitting behind me on a plane from California maybe 7 years ago. But I didn't know it was him. I just said, I know that voice. I know that because I'm very audible. That's the musician in me. And I was like, auditory or whatever the word is. So I was like,
Mhm.
I kept looking at him. I said, no, don't know him. And then when he stood up, I saw him next to me. I was like, Ray. He said, Mark. It was like, so he was in the process of selling his financial planning practice. We talked about me buying it, but it wasn't really the best fit for either of us. But we became probably better friends now than we were before. And he decided his new business was going to be called The Luckiest Guy in the World, because he has complete financial freedom. But I'm putting together a webinar that's going to happen starting next week. It's really called a web conversation. And we were talking about life stages and the different attributes of life stages and the things you do. So for instance, when you're a child, you pretty much, you observe and you absorb. And as a student, you start to learn and grow. And it goes around the circle till you're a legator, where you're going to enrich and give. I think it's give and enrich. So you could be in that stage. He's what I would call the consumer to legator stage. But I said, where do you think you can learn the exercises in taking aspects from different parts of your life that help propel you forward today? I said, where would you like to be today? He said, well, I feel like I am in the child stage. He's 79 years old. And I
Wow.
said, why is that? He said, I just want to observe and absorb because I want to figure out what I want to do the rest of my life. And that's why we're friends, because that's my model too. It's like I have a lot of things I still want to do. I want to be vital. I want to grow. You either progress forward or you go backwards, I believe. And I think humans are built to progress forward. So, but I think you asked about characteristics. And I think you can take characteristics from a lot of different places and you can change yourself depending on where you are and what it is you want to do.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of constantly evolving. I know sometimes I find that I beat myself up a little because I'm like, "Oh, I didn't finish what I went to school for by being a musical theater major," and whereas wanting to be on Broadway is no longer something that's on my radar. It's not something that's on my horizon. I've grown, I've evolved. I like writing more. I like communicating with people and I like learning about entrepreneurs like yourself. And I was like, I feel like I'm still very much on my way. I'm 25 and I'm like, I don't need to have it figured out just yet. I like the idea that evolution is still something that you're able to have. I feel like a lot of people I graduated with have this idea of, oh, you need to have it figured out by now. Like once you're out of school, you need to have moved to the city you want to follow your dreams in. You need to do something with your major, this and that. So I mean, I think I like that so much more to hear that from you, from someone who's found success and found is on his way to financial freedom. I think that knowing that there's the opportunity to continue to evolve and learn and absorb and observe, as you said, is so wonderful to hear as someone in their 20s who sometimes feels that existential dread of
If I
not.
may, I'll recommend a book to you and to
Please
some
do.
of and the listeners called The Untethered Soul by a
Mm,
guy named
mhm.
Michael A. Singer. And before I read that, I read another book of his, which was really the prequel to that. So it came out afterwards, but it showed how he got to become this untethered soul. And it's called The Surrender Experiment. And basically, it's a story of a guy who I guess was a teenager. And he basically had made a decision. He didn't really want to go to college and do the traditional route. And instead, he wanted to meditate. He just wanted to become a meditator. And he spent years becoming an expert meditator and then building a little place to do that. He had a little money and he invested in a property. And people started coming to him to learn to meditate. And his little property eventually turned into like he built a temple for meditation. And
Wow.
then that eventually grew and he started to have all these world famous speakers coming and spiritual people. And it continued to build. By the way, along the way, I don't remember if he had finished college or he eventually did, but he ended up becoming a professor on many subjects, for a guy that didn't want to go to college.
Ironic. Yeah.
Ended up running a multi-million-dollar corporation, one of
Wow.
the largest early healthcare software providers and service companies, because all he was open to the universe. These things kept coming to him, and he decided, well, it's coming to me for a reason. I need to pursue it. And that's what he did. An amazing story. And now he's a speaker, inspirational kind of guy. And it's a fascinating story. And I think it goes to the idea. So, two things I would say is progress, not perfection, which is an important thing,
Mhm.
so you don't beat yourself up. And the other thing is be open to what the universe presents you. It doesn't mean you have to jump on everything. You have to learn to say no too. But
Right.
sometimes if it feels right, do it. It sounds very simple, but trying to do that. So I know you're going to ask me soon about, my music activities these days. But this part, I don't think I told you that it came to me from nowhere, managing kind of hip hop artists, and which I never thought of. If you asked me would I ever get involved
Wow.
in the
Yeah.
music business again. So it's a little startup thing and we'll see where it goes. But I've actually discovered some real talents and I'm getting much more acclimated with that music and more than I was. I didn't really know that much about it. It's a little bit out of my field. And from that has sprung maybe another source of a young band that does kind of old hippie music, jam style music that I really do understand. So they're like, it's all these possibilities by me being open to that one thing.
Yeah.
So we've been in the recording studio recording some hip hop stuff and just open to it. I don't know what's going to happen with it, but it's like, I always want to get back involved. So if it found me, which it did, just be open to it and see what happens.
That is really cool. That is really interesting. If we're offline and you have any recommendations for me to try out, or if you have any recommendations for people I should start listening to, you got to let me know. Do you have any other resources or recommendations that young people should start looking at, or things they should read, listen to, watch that'll help them start to figure out, hey, maybe this is what I want to do?
Well, I don't know about that, but I can tell you books that have been really influential on me that
Sure.
helped in my own growth. One was called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, written in like, I think the 1920s or 30s.
Hmm.
Brian, Our Engineer Smiled. Do you know that book?
I don't know.
Oh, is it? Wave, Brian. Yes or no? Did you know? Oh, he doesn't know the book. Okay. Just smiling anyway. Like the title, I guess. But anyway, that's kind of like a success manual that's gone through the ages. Think and grow. That everything starts in your mind is the idea. And then he wrote a big, almost like a Bible of success called The Law of Success. That I was actually in a group of business owners for a long time. The Laws of Success, I believe it's called. And we studied that for like years, studied that book. That was a very influential book. And then there's a lot of other guys. A guy named Earl Nightingale was part of the whole success movement. This guy was a broadcaster. He was a radio guy, had this great big booming voice. But he did a lot of, tapes at the time and recordings. You can get them still, I'm sure, on streaming or on CDs or whatever, DVDs. So a lot of my training came from that stuff, like positive thinking, motivational, growth-oriented types of literature and recordings. So I would
Cool.
definitely, and I don't see that many young people really taking that stuff in. So that's something I would definitely take a look at.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's really helpful. So, yeah, circling back to questions about being a musician, how do you keep active now as a musician? I know you mentioned that you're now involved in helping out hip hop artists, but how do you continue to keep active yourself as a
Well,
musician?
I'm primarily a bass player, and I play some guitar and I play some piano. And I'm not a real good singer, but I like to sing. And I've got a
I keep telling CamaPlan that we're having a karaoke night once this is all over. You're invited.
Well, I'd rather have a jam session. I'll put a band together and we'll have a live band.
That sounds even better.
That would be right. That would be even better, right? So I would love to do that. So I've done things like over the years. I've played at a lot of the companies that I've worked with, their parties and things like that. Lately, I have this band and it's called Herding Cats because that's what it takes to get us together, if you know that expression. And we've been just starting to play around bars and stuff, and then the pandemic happened. But we play a combination of originals. So my real passion is songwriting. I have some old songs I've written and some newer songs, and they're all sort of in a classic rock type of style. So there's two other songwriters that are both close friends of mine, and now two of the drummers are depending on the season. One's in Florida part of the time. And one of them is a good long-term social friend, and the other one was a drummer that I played with back to high school. We've played off and on for 20 or 30 years and hadn't seen each other for a long time. And now he's playing with us. So it's a joy. And one of the two other songwriters, one, we actually were in the crib together. Our parents were like very close friends. That's how far back we go. So it's a joy to like these people that I'm being reunited with and who I really respect. And we respect each other's music and we collaborate on each other's music. So it's just hard getting them together. We have there's a place. One of the guys is from New Jersey, and I wanted to book this place, and we finally got it booked for January 8th, Friday night. If anybody, because you know what, he didn't have any openings before then, but I don't know that anybody's playing live before then anyway. So
Right,
I think
exactly.
we're going to do an appearance in my backyard soon and invite people to drive by or stand at distance, and
I like
so
that. Yeah.
so I do it mainly for the joy of it today, but I like to record some of the songs and put out some music, but it's not my driving force these days like it used to be.
Right. But is classic rock your favorite genre, or is there any other genres that you really like?
Well, that's a great question. I was 11 years old when the Monkees came out. It was a
Oh.
television show. And I was struck by the Monkees.
Mhm.
And if you like the Monkees, you had to like the Beatles more or less. So I went right from the Monkees to the Beatles because I was a little maybe young for the Beatles when they first came out. And when I got into the Beatles, if you like them, you couldn't ignore the fact that they actually did a lot of cover songs. People don't realize how many cover songs of Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Carl Perkins and the Everly Brothers and people like that. So I was like, now I got to listen to all that stuff. And I loved all that stuff. So now I'm listening to stuff that's like from way before I was born. And then, of course, I lived through the classic rock era. So bands like the Allman Brothers Band were, heavy influences and stuff we listened to. And Santana and all kinds of, such a rich period for music. But in terms of what I really, really like, I mean, I I love doo-wop music. I love
Mm.
like a
Oh,
cappella vocal music. And I love, the early rock and roll. It's just like that stuff's in my blood. It's not even, I wasn't even born when a lot of that stuff was going on, but I love that stuff. And I like some jazz. I study classical music. So I like a lot of different, I like some of the new age music that's around. I'm starting to like some hip hop music. So
yeah,
I have
right.
broad taste, but my base, the stuff that's in my blood is early through classic rock and roll. Can't
Cool.
get the beat out of my heart.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really, really awesome. I'm all over the place. I don't know if I have necessarily a favorite genre. Sorry to any listeners of this genre out there. The one thing I can't do is like the screamo music. That other than that, I can do everything else. Sorry to anybody who's really into screamo and also into finance.
Well, and I was never much into heavy metal. That was sort of our version of all that. But although I liked a lot of punk music and new wave, that in the 80s too. I like a lot of early 80s music.
Yeah.
But I think you're going to have to come sing with our band sometime.
Oh, I would love that. I miss singing. I do miss singing. That is one thing I try to bring to the office and people are like, "No, no." So, I have to right place, right time. So, I have to
Well, we
learn
have a
that.
little studio in my basement, so you have to come to the basement sometime.
Oh,
Maybe I can
that would
get
be
Brian
awesome.
over to record us.
Yeah. We got a dream team right here on this podcast
Oh,
today.
actually, I have a little job for you, Brian. I just thought about this. Okay.
That would be awesome. Yeah, I would love that. I'd love to get to sing again, especially with a live band. So,
Cool. We'll do it.
to pivot in a different direction,
Sure.
let's talk about the Fiscal Therapy Solution 1.0. How did it originate and how long did it take you to develop?
Well, like I said before, I was thinking about writing a book for a long time, and I wanted to put my thoughts down. And for a long time, I thought I'd like to write a book, but I have nothing to say. And then I really started seeing the divide between what we do and what other people do, and I thought I ought to write about that. So I first thought I can write letters and I can write articles, I guess. But writing a book is different, the way you have to put the words together and the way it reads. So I didn't think I could write a book. So I had a recommendation. I hired a guy, and with him, we came up with some of the things like the chapter titles and the concept of comparing this to a doctor's office kind of thing. But his writing wasn't perfect. It didn't sound like my voice. So we parted ways. I basically bought what he had already written. We also agreed on using humor. So there is a bit of humor in the book.
Mhm.
So I like that aspect. But it didn't sound like it was my voice. So then I hired a woman who was an editor to rewrite it. And she helped a lot too, but she wanted to. My book, as I mentioned, is for entrepreneurs and people primarily in that situation. She wanted me to write it for her mother-in-law and her daughter, and you can't be everything to all people. And I was like, there were some general principles, but she kept throwing in stories that weren't really my stories. So I wanted the book to have all stories. I've changed the names and changed some of the details to protect the clients, but they're all based on kind of real stories in some form or another. They're hypotheticals, but they're based on real stories. So I
Yeah.
wanted to do that. So then I got this other company. So it's really my third try, and it's over a 3-year period that they would write it, but they did it based on interviews with me. And then I edited it. So in the end, what you have is a base of, and it's only 100 pages, but there's a little bit of the first guy, there's a little bit of the editor that I had hired.
Uh-huh.
Most of what they did is pure me because it was basically my words recorded and they just kind of formulated it. And then I've gone back in. In fact, it's going to be the same number edition, but the new next printing, I've updated it with more, now I'm learning that I actually could write this because I did write most of it. So
Right,
sort of like the
exactly.
Monkees, they started out as a fake band on TV, and then they learned to play their songs, and then they started writing music, and they became like a real. It's like so I'm
Exactly.
like the Pinocchio of financial writers. I started out as a fake and became the real thing over time. So the Monkees are the Pinocchio of rock and roll band.
Cool, cool. I like that. So this solution contrasts conventional wisdom on financial and wealth management. So can you discuss each of the steps of the Fiscal Therapy Solution 1.0 and provide some examples of how they apply?
Sure. I'll do it quickly, but the first chapter, as I said, is what brought you here. So that's one of the things I like to talk to people first is like, why are you pursuing this? What brought you to want to meet with me or come meet with my team or whatever it is? Because that's going to give you a little bit of an insight into where they are. once they've answered that, we start asking some, thought-provoking questions. One of the favorite ones is from a coach I had called the strategic coach. It's a
Mhm.
guy named Dan Sullivan, and we now call it the Dan Sullivan question, which is, if this were June 9th, 2023, Jessica, and I asked you on a personal, professional, and financial basis, what would have to happen looking back over that 3-year period for that to be a successful period in your life? What would that look like?
Hmm.
And, that's something you really need to think about.
Right. I was like, oh
And
gosh, I hope he doesn't want me to answer it right now. I need some time.
you can get back to me in writing afterwards, but
I will. I'm thinking about it now.
well, you know what? It really is a good question for everyone to ask themselves. And I do
Yeah.
this periodically myself. And, one of the interesting things is we're in the time of COVID-19 and there's all this stuff going on. So I've been asking that question to clients a lot who I know, and I know what their goals were before. And a lot of their thinking has shifted. A lot of people it's important to revisit a lot because the meaning of things has changed for a lot of people. People are trying to stay in business in some cases. They may not have the same goals they had before. It might be to survive right now. There are people, I know people have sold their businesses for a lot of money, but they say things like, I see how many people are struggling. I want to be more philanthropic now. Maybe I don't need 5 or 6 cars anymore. So it's all over the map, but everybody's thinking I'm seeing is shifting a little bit. I like to start with that question. And then I ask them questions like, what dangers do you see in terms of getting that vision? And, like what could get in your way? And then what opportunities do you have to deal with those issues? And what strengths do you have to overcome those things? What strengths have you used over your time? And I want them to end up with confidence about, hey, you can achieve that vision, because you have a lot of things, you have opportunities, you have strengths, there's things that can move you in that direction. So we ask a lot of those kind of like thought-provoking questions. I ask them a lot about their attitudes of money, because people grow up with, and there's a whole section called Moneytudes in here about people's attitudes about money. There are quotes. And I think that, what happens to people a lot are influenced by the relationship with money. So we ask things like that. And then, of course, we ask all the factual things too. Where are you today? What's your income look like? Is it regular? Is it irregular? What kind of assets do you have? Where are they invested? Have you protected yourself? There's all kinds of things that we're trying to determine factually that I think all financial advisors ask. I think the initial stuff that we ask might be a little different than what a lot of people ask. So that's getting to know you. Once we have all that, we do sort of a draft of a plan, which this is what we see so far. Here's some things we're thinking about. Try them on for size. How do they align with you? Do they make sense? Is this directions you want to go into? If we say, what if you were to do this to try to get there? What would that look like? And how do you feel about that? And we mull that in a bit and get their feelings for things. Then we come out with recommendations. And that's the part that says, the chapter that says what we need to do is, and here are our recommendations. A lot of times we give alternative recommendations depending on, who and what they are and how they presented themselves. And they start to make decisions now. I want to do this. I don't want to do that. I want to do this. I don't want to do that. And there are implications to those decisions. So we'll say, well, if you did this and you didn't do this, then you might come up short here. How do you feel about that? And we keep getting that to where we get on a plan that we can agree with. So the next step of the plan is implementation. Now we put it into action. I call that "this won't hurt a bit," which is like the doctor.
Right.
Like, okay, get your shot now and take your medicine. It'll help you.
Mhm.
So, and then the last part is see you in 3 to 6 months, which is something doctors say. We do regular reviews after that point to see where they are in relation to their goals and where they stand in regard to it. And then there's an accountability factor. If you said you're going to do this, are you doing it? And where do you stand in relation to those goals? And then we adjust them if we need to. That's a pretty good overview of the process, I would say, as to how we do it.
Yeah, that helped me understand it, and I like that you're putting it in the context with some humor and the doctor analogy. I think that's really helpful as a reader and someone who is sometimes, as an English major, sometimes I'm so reluctant to read anything, especially if it's going to inform me on something, just because I feel like maybe that's just me being stubborn, but who knows? So I think that's awesome to know for listeners and prospective readers. Thank you for sharing that and for going through that.
Personally, by the way. I listen more to like holistic healers and nutritional people than I do traditional doctors, but I think there's a place for both. And the way they prescribe, and I don't necessarily mean just prescriptions, but the way they diagnose and recommend treatment is, I think there are similarities in all aspects of the healing field. So, and
Right.
to me, this is a healing field because I think that people struggle with money. Even people that have a lot of money, I think they struggle with the issues around it. So I feel we are healers to a certain extent and give people more confidence about the directions they're going in regard to their financial success.
Yeah, that is awesome. I love that you are a fiscal therapist, and that's something I had not heard until before this, and I think that it's very, very interesting, Mark. So we're winding down. One of the last questions that we try to ask everybody that comes onto the podcast is just overview of kind of everything you've talked about. So what would you say are your keys to building wealth, unlocking your financial freedom? It doesn't have to necessarily be financial. I know you kind of have so many different interests that dip into different things, but what is something that's informed the way that you look at
Look,
success?
success is different for everybody. I mean, it's whatever people, and I don't think success, there's an expression that success is not a destination, it's a journey. So I don't think, you arrive at one point and you say, okay, I'm successful. And I also said progress, not perfection. So the way I measure success is how are you evolving? Are you moving forward? We talked about that earlier. So, but if you do have specific financial goals to turn into something concrete, I think that I talked to you before about some of the basic things. First of all, have goals. Most people don't even have written goals. So, I recommend in life, and I've done this for many, many years now, starting when I was about 19, when I was in the cookware business, writing down specific written goals. And I still do that on a regular basis. And I think having written goals is the first start. And then the flip side of that is don't beat yourself up if you don't hit every goal, as long as you're progressing towards them and you're doing the things that you're accountable to yourself in terms of the things that you said you were going to do. So that's the first thing. The second thing is pay yourself first, put money away on some kind of regular systematic basis. Number three is probably diversification. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. I've got some clients, some very successful real estate people that are, it's one of the great ways to build great wealth. But many of them, as they get older, have said, I've got to diversify. I've got to be in other things because they realize, and this is a great period to look at it, what's the future of commercial real estate now if you're a retail real estate developer? We're not really sure. What about if it's commercial office buildings? A lot more work at home, a lot more people aren't going back to the office. What does all that look like? So the clients that we were telling for years, diversify, have different buckets of money and wealth, are the ones that tend to be the happiest no matter what they're doing. And then, regular reviews, periodically looking at where you are. And I also think it's not for everybody, but I think most people need someone to talk to about it. A professional, a guide, a guide, a coach, a therapist, an advisor. We're usually called advisors. But I mean, I think that it's a hard journey to do yourself. There's robo advisors now, and they do the numbers, but they can't, the stuff that I told you about, the most important stuff is the high touch stuff. Like, what do you really want? Who are you? What are your values? Robo advisors can't do that. So they can help. I'm trying to figure out how they can help us. They could be a tool, just like, robots, automation can do a lot of things people can do, but they can't replace people. They don't have hearts.
Thank you. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's so great to hear. Thank you. And thanks so much again for joining us. Pardon the pun. It's coming. You rock. Uh,
I love it. I love it. That's good. So they're my favorite words when I hear that.
well, I'm glad. I'm glad you didn't. Most people roll their eyes, so I appreciate it. I've learned so much from this discussion, Mark. I can't wait to share this with our listeners and get back to you on answering that question, the Sullivan question.
Sure. I'm expecting you to.
I have to think it over. But the last question we do have is how can people reach you? What's a website or social media site that listeners can go to or use to get in touch with you?
Sure. The fiscaltherapysolution.com, or also it leads to the same place, but Marc, it's MARC at Marc J. Bernstein, the letter J, MARC at marcjbernstein.com are probably the best ways. I'm also on Facebook under Marc J. Bernstein, spelled the same way, on LinkedIn, and probably about covers it. And I think you have a great future as an interviewer. I just need to say that too.
Thank you. I was nominated most likely to be a talk show host in high school because they got rid of Loudest. So thanks.
There you go. That's great. I think you'd be
Appreciate it.
great at it.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Mark. Really, really appreciated you being here. And for those of you listening, tune in next week to hear more from experts who have paved their road to financial freedom, or call CamaPlan. Reach out to our guests today to learn more about how you can start taking control of your future wealth. Bye.